and I think it turned out really well. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Toast Hammer, specifically Road to Necromunda. In our last video in this series, we finally figured out how to assemble our gangs in a facsimilitude of what an actual Necromunda game should look like. I still have no idea if it's actually going to work or not, but we will see, I suppose. However, that left us with the issue of color. Painting models is one of the essential parts of the hobby and one that I do enjoy, so I wanted to make sure these guys were looking good before they hit the tabletop. So without any further ado, let's jump into this painting process and see what makes me a secret art genius. Alright, looking at our model here, because this was kind of a test color scheme, I wasn't sure if this was going to be the final result or not. I wanted to use a model that didn't really matter. If you remember, at the end of the last video, there were a couple models that just didn't really have a space in the gang yet, so I didn't put arms on them. I figured I could sacrifice one of them to the test painting gods in order to better finalize my scheme. Luckily, I kind of was really happy with the first one, so I didn't need to really use it as a sacrifice at all, but I'm still glad I took those precautions. I'm using a whole bunch of colors for this scheme, as it turns out, way more than I usually do for my ad mech. But let's get a rundown on what's actually going into the model. The majority of the colors are going to be put into the skin tones, because I wanted to practice my faces a little bit, as painting robots, I don't get to paint a lot of faces. We're starting with a base of African Shadow, Violet Red, and Pale Sand to bring up the skin color, but because this is Delaque and they are weird and just a little bit creepy, I'm adding a touch of deep blue sky and Stonewall Gray to just bring those unnatural tones back to the forefront. I want this character to look like he was originally a normal dark-skinned man, but then years of never seeing the sunlight and perhaps some other weird stuff happening to his complexion has turned it to somewhat more of an unnatural tone. Next, we have the cloak, where I'm going to be attempting to paint a chromatic black, more on that later, but we're starting with a base of royal purple mixed with deep yellow and black. The armor, which I described a thought of a cool effect for that in the previous video, is going for more of a pearlescent kind of fish scale tone, which is going to be contrasting blue-green with the pearl violet shifting colors paint range. All the silver details will be done in gunmetal. It's metal. What do you want from me? In the OSL, will be covered by a base of bold titanium white and then hit with a combination of fluorescent blue and green, mixed together to make fluorescent teal. So, starting to mix the skin, I take out my African Shadow by Skill 75 and immediately dump most of it onto my wet palette. Apparently, the Scale 75 bottles have stoppers under their caps, so you can't actually use the paint until you poke that out of the way. Didn't know that. We'll never make that mistake again. Well, I had plenty of my base color already on the palette, so I got to mixing up a bunch of different shades and trying to strike a balance between something that would be more highlighty and more mid-tony. I wasn't going to worry about super deep shadows with this guy, just as a test model. Then I sprinkled in a little bit of that blue and gray just to push those highlighted areas into a more desaturated, less rich tone. I took my time with the face because, again, I haven't painted too many faces, and I wanted to focus on the detailing to see if I could push those highlights of those raised regions, like so many good at painting YouTubers do. If they can do it, damn it, I will too. I think I did a pretty good job. Just take your time, take it easy, use a pretty small brush, and get 3 points of contact with the model. Both forearms against the table, hands touching each other. It leads to the least amount of necessary movement when painting and the greatest stability. Moving on to that was chromatic black. Now, in theory, chromatic black is achieved by mixing contrasting colors, in this case, purple and yellow, which were really good choices for my model for a reason I will describe down the road. But by mixing those two together, usually in darker tones, you can achieve a black color that contains a lot more color information than just using straight up black pigmented paint. I didn't have dark versions of these colors, so I just used black to darken it up. I'm not 100% sure if I fully pulled off this effect, and I'm even less sure if the camera actually picked it up at all. I want to say that it looks a little bit like a more interesting, more rich black than my usual black color schemes, but that might just be the placebo effect, and I couldn't really say for sure if it worked at all. But I think it did, for, again, reasons I'll describe later. Next came the armor. First was a pretty straightforward coat of blue-green. I thought about undercoating this in gray first, just to clean up those blackened areas, but this is a pretty well-covering paint, and really only one coat was necessary to get the strong teal color that I was really looking for. And after that was applying the Pearl Violet Shifters paint, which I'd used previously on my other test model to try and experiment with color shifting stuff after my thumbprint conversion idea kind of failed. Still wanna get back to that someday. But for now, this will have to do. I applied a single coat of it, and it didn't really have the strength of the effect that I was looking for compared to the other test model, which had a much nicer and more noticeable purple shift in the hue. I began thinking that perhaps the teal color was just too strong and was not giving the purple any room to grow. I could have taken a different approach, but instead I just applied 2 more coats of the Shifters paint on top of the armor, and it ended up looking pretty good and even better in a more natural lighting condition as it was fully dried. I'm ultimately quite happy with how the effect turned out. It just took a couple coats to get there. After that, I painted all of the metal bits with gunmetal. Seriously, what do you want from me? And then after that was the OSL, which I originally planned on using fluorescent blue and green to do, but I noticed that the teal effect was a lot stronger than I had originally accounted for and was kind of dominating the armor portions of the model. So I thought I might have to pivot, because teal armor and teal OSL leads to just kind of a lack of contrast, especially in that sort of pill-shaped container of, I don't know, is it like a Death Stranding baby? That's my headcanon now. It's a Death Stranding baby. But either way, I would need to pivot. So I decided to go to magenta to bring in some nice contrast. And I applied that over all of the areas and pre-shaded some of the blackened cloak with some nice offset OSL lighting reflections. After that was done, there was the final touch, going back to my secret weapon of my last painting project, which you can see in the corner there. I picked up MIG Wet Effects once again, the super high glossy final coat of enamel gloss finish over the outside of the cloak. Because again, I'm going for kind of a fishy theme with these boys and ladies. I wanted to kind of bring some unworldly shine to their cloaks. Kind of like they just stepped out of a lake or something like that. Or perhaps more of like a raincoat vibe. One coat of this was looking pretty okay, but it wasn't quite the high gloss sheen that I was really looking for, so I applied another coat after it had taken a minute for that to dry, and then it really started to come together. At this point, the model was virtually done being painted, and I really enjoyed it. And then a thought popped into my mind. I thought the colors were looking really nice together, even though it wasn't a traditional color scheme. Purple, teal, and magenta are kind of related, but it's not really complementary, and it's not really analogous or triad. Or is it? Because remember, in that chromatic black, I had yellow in there. And yellow, cyan, and magenta are the 3 primary colors of the subtractive color wheel, making this actually, secretly, without even my knowledge, a triad color scheme. Again, I don't know if this is the placebo effect, but I do think that black does look really nice with everything else. And I'm gonna say that I'm a secret art genius, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, I very much hope you enjoyed watching this video of my Necromunda painting. I'm very happy with how this test model worked out. The longest part for sure was the skin and the face, but I imagine that'll be the case on every model, and also the skin tone on every model is going to be different. Not everyone has the same skin, so not all of my models do either. But that is a look into how I kind of come up with paint scheme ideas. I start with like a loose concept, like that color shifting paint, and build off of that, thinking about what colors might work with it or against it, and what can come to kind of a nice, satisfying conclusion of a total color scheme. As always, if you like this video, feel free to give it a like. It really helps the channel and me out. And what do you think of this as a Delaque color scheme? Is it too bright for these grim dank spies? Of course it's not finished. I would add some washes or something. It's part of the process in more of a finished model. This was just getting the idea down. But leave a comment. How did I do? And of course, please stay subscribed so you continue seeing my develop in the world of Necromunda and other painting, hobbying, kit bashes, and other such videos as well. And then I'll see you guys next time. Peace!